Something interesting is happening on doorsteps all across America, and it's called container gardening. Now, if you're a regular viewer of Oklahoma Gardening, you know over the past couple of years we've talked to you about container gardening with vegetables. But did you realize that you can also plant fall bulbs this time of year and enjoy the spring color in containers as well? And I'm going to show you how to do that. Now, all you need are obviously containers. And you want to be careful in the selection, because if you use like clay containers or plastic and you do leave them out all winter long, they can crack and freeze on you. Wooden containers would be a little bit better, but the most important thing is to use something that has holes in the bottom for drainage, or then you want to put in gravel if you don't have holes. Now we're going to use just black plastic containers, and we're going to take them inside, and we'll talk about that a little bit later. But the reason we use them is because of the frames that we have constructed here, where we actually just set the containers in and it gives it a little bit different appearance. Now we also recommend that you use a soilless potting soil or potting mix. You can use compost, but if you go out and dig up the heavy soil in your garden, you may be a little bit disappointed because it can cake on you and get too thick and heavy and actually disrupt the bulb planting or growth period. And then of course you want to use various types of bulbs, and we'll show you some of those too. But the first thing that we've done is mixed up our potting soil. Now what we have done is actually incorporated some bone meal for the phosphorus, which is very important in bulb planting. But we're not going to put in any other fertilizer, because we'll use a liquid fertilizer next spring when they start to grow, or an organic type like maybe blood meal as a side dressing. But if you're not going to be regular in your fertilizing practices, it would be a good idea to go ahead and incorporate a complete fertilizer high in phosphorus and potassium, and then a little bit of bone meal on the side. And we've just mixed that up ahead of time. Now I've put my first layer of potting soil in, and basically the way we're going to do this is make it similar to what we would do with the lasagna. And we're just going to layer different layers with the various bulbs depending upon the planting depth. Now again, we've put in a few inches of potting soil, and we're going to put in the first bulbs that like deep planting, and that's going to be hyacinths and our narcissus. Now we have 3 of each, and the way we're going to do this is put in about an inch from the side of the pot, and we'll just rotate those 3 at that depth, and then we're going to come right in between those with our narcissus. Now what I've done is I've selected colors that will be very appealing to each other, such as pinks, purples, and yellows. And again, we're just pushing those right in there. You can see what we've done. And the reason that we want to keep the bulbs from the side, again, because it'll be a little bit easier for them to freeze. So we want to put in the next layer of potting soil. And this has a lot of peat moss in it, so you can see it's very dusty, and it's also extremely important that you get it watered properly, and sometimes soaking it ahead of time is a good idea. Now the next layer that we're going to put in is with our tulips, and we have 5 tulip bulbs that are a pink color. Now one thing that I would encourage you to do, if you're going to try to get all these to bloom at the same time, you need to make sure that you get the same cultivars that are going to bloom either early spring, mid-spring, or late spring, and that's what we've tried to do here. So we're going to put the tulips in, poke them down with planting right size. Then we're going to come in, and that was about probably 6 inches with the tulips. The hyacinths were planted about 8 inches, and so were the narcissus. Then the next layer of soil, and then the last thing that we've selected was the grape hyacinths, and they like planting depth about anywhere from 3 to 4 inches. And then what I've tried to do is remember where I had the tulips, and I have 5 bulbs again, and I'm going to alternate those, pack them down, and then the last layer of soil. Now that's quite a few bulbs in one container, but just imagine the color that we're going to get. Now we'll again make sure that we pack it down. I always want to leave a little bit of a ridge so water will stand and soak nicely, and then we're just going to water that in. Now a few things you need to remember. If we leave this outside, again in northern or central part of the state, it will freeze the bulbs and we'll lose them. So it's important that on the extreme cold temperatures, you want to take it in a garage. And what we did last year with this one right here, we tried it before, and you can see hyacinth and narcissus bulbs that made it and will even bloom for us again. But we kept them in the garage here or in the barn where they wouldn't freeze on us. Now if it gets too hot, you'll also initiate bulb growth. So you want to keep them around freezing. And remember, in the ground, the soil acts as an insulation blanket, so they truly don't freeze. But in a container, it would be easy for them to do so. Now, obviously, this time of year is a great idea, too, to go ahead and plant bulbs out in the ground. Now, as a reminder, crocus need to be planted at 3 inches, grape hyacinths 3 to 4, hyacinths 6 to 8, daffodils, narcissus 6 to 8, and tulips 5 to 7. You can continue planting those throughout October, and tulips will even do well planted into November, so you've still got plenty of time. And if you're confused about bulb planting depth, check at your garden centers or any place that you get your bulbs. Usually they'll have a planting chart for you. Now, those of you in the southern part of the state that might be able to leave this container out during the winter without it getting too extremely cold, you might even think about putting violas or pansies planted right in the top now, and just go ahead and use it as a decoration throughout the entire winter. Then on those extremely cold temperature nights again, just take them inside and keep them from freezing. And then what we will also do next year is, once the bulbs have finished and they start dying, it's easy to go ahead and use the soil again and plant annuals for next summer. So container gardening is a lot of fun. Now, when we're talking about flowering bulbs, there's also the ones that are sensitive to the winter. Let me take you over to another location and we'll talk about those a little bit. Well, I just talked to you about bulbs that are fall planted that need at least 15 weeks of cold temperatures to initiate the flowering in the spring. But now I want to talk to you about the other type of bulbs or tubers or rhizomes, depending upon the type of flower, that are generally considered not cold hardy in Oklahoma, again depending on where you live. And a listing of those would be elephant ear, cannas, dahlias, caladiums, glads, and some lilies, just to mention a few. Now again, keep in mind that it depends on where you live in Oklahoma. Some of the southern counties are successful in overwintering some of these crops, and it also depends on where you plant them in your home. You may create a microclimate that will actually cause the plants to overwinter. And also, like for example in some of the cannas, it depends on the cultivar. Some will overwinter. But if you know that you have a particular cultivar that needs to be dug, as a general rule, you can let them get frosted or frozen lightly and then dig them up. Now, if you have a lot, you may want to start ahead of time. Or if we're to experience a winter like last year with our first freeze, where it dropped from 80 degrees down to 11, it may be a good idea to go ahead and dig them ahead of time. But here at Oklahoma Gardening, as a general rule, we'll let them get a light frost, and the foliage will then still be on, and we'll let that start to brown, and we'll dig them, and we'll let it dry a little bit at the top. Then after it's dried, we'll disconnect it from the tuber, which is the case here with our caladiums. And then we'll store them in the barn in a cool, dry location, usually either in perlite, peat moss, shredded newspaper, sawdust, anything like that that will keep the moisture away from them. But again, if you let it get too moist, too warm, they'll go ahead and germinate and possibly rot. Now, if you're in a location that you have to worry about mice or insects, you want to be sure and take care of that situation too. Again, it depends on the location and what you're going to try to do in protecting them. But as usual, someone has come up with an idea, a little gadget called a bulb saver, just specifically designed for these types of bulbs or tubers, again depending on the flower. Now, this is a bulb saver. It's developed by an individual out of New Jersey. And again, it's an interesting idea. They're not available yet in the marketplace, so you would have to order them direct from them. But it reminds me of a netting that we used to find around grapes and various things. But what it is to be used for, and here's what I've done, kind of developed myself to make it a little bit easier. This is just to demonstrate and make it easier to show. But say next year, if you were going to plant one of these tender bulbs or tubers that we're talking about, what you would do is dig a hole in the soil about the size of where you would plant it. Now what I did to get it a little bit more uniform and easier to plant versus flat like it came in the shipping, I stretched it around a cup that's about the same size, set it out in the sun so it would kind of adjust to it, and I fill the cup with soil. So what I would do then is in my planting hole, I would place that in there, and I've already got soil then in that area. Now keep in mind we're going to have soil around the edge because we've dug a hole. Then I would place that tuber right in the center and then fill it with the remaining soil. And again, this would be next spring when we would plant these particular crops. You would actually leave a little bit of the bulb saver net on the surface so you could identify it. And then they have a label that they send with you that you can attach to it and label the color or the cultivar. Then it would be growing, and remember the root system would grow out. It would grow all summer long. Then this time of year, when they're easy to dig, the whole purpose of this is that you can maybe get your trowel, loosen around the edge a little bit, and then you can just lift up the entire tuber or bulb, again depending on the flower. Now you can do one of two things. You can store this entire container inside in a tray or a bag or something with air circulation, or you could take it out and knock the soil off. But it's to make it easy to find, easy to dig. So a neat little idea that we thought we'd share with you. Now if you would like to get more information on bulb planting, there's a fact sheet 6408 on landscape maintenance schedule, or there's even one on winter protection of landscape plants, which is very crucial this time of year, 6404. And those are good fact sheets to gather up this time of year from your county extension office. So drop by and visit with them and see if you can't get some more information to help you for your fall gardening chores.